Hello, welcome back to our IELTS Grammar Masterclass course. We are going to look at phrasal verbs and collocations today for the speaking section of the IELTS exam. So this is really good practice, not just for speaking actually, but just the IELTS in general. And we're going to focus on really useful examples for you so you can distinguish the different phrasal verbs, collocations, so you can feel comfortable with them. And these are really, really important for the higher band scores. Definitely one to pay attention to today if that's what you're interested in. Okay, so let's begin today by looking at phrasal verbs. Maybe you've heard of phrasal verbs before, but what exactly are they? Well, they are combinations of a main verb and one or more particle. So the particles can be either prepositions or adverbs, and together they actually create a different meaning than if they were to be on their own. So they're an interesting part of the English language because they can be quite creative, quite different, quite unique, and definitely something to pepper into your speech to add it. It gives it more variety, gives it more depth and interest. Okay, so the meaning of these phrasal verbs the meaning is often idiomatic, which means it's figurative, it's not necessarily real. And you can't always tell from the meanings of the individual components what this phrase will mean. So often it might have nothing to do with the original meanings. And that's okay, don't worry about that because that's the whole point of phrasal verbs, really, to create a new meaning. Okay, so the first phrasal verb that we're going to look at today is bring up. We've got an example here. In the discussion about climate change, it's essential to bring up the importance of individual responsibility. So what does it mean in this setting? Maybe you know this phrasal verb, maybe you've seen it. To bring up is to raise or to speak up about something. But you might not have known that if you were analysing the individual components of this phrasal verb. Okay, next one, come across. While researching for my project, I came across an interesting article on renewable energy. Do you know what this means? Maybe you have an idea? So in this context, it means you found, you discovered an interesting article. Might not have guessed that from the individual words here. So we're starting to see a pattern here. And of course, the verb fits the tense that it's in. So come across in this example becomes came across. Next one, point out. I would like to point out that effective communication is crucial in any team. What does it mean in this setting? It means I would like to highlight or to show. Look into. Researchers are currently looking into alternative sources of clean energy. Any ideas as to what this means? Well, in this context, researching. I know that we have researchers are currently looking into. That's why phrasal verbs are so good as well, because they add variety. So instead of saying researchers are currently researching, you can use a phrasal verb instead. But yes, it means looking into means researching, finding out, discovering. Okay. Next one, bring about. Government policies can bring about positive changes in environmental practices. bring about. Any ideas what this means in this context? Government policies can lead to, actually, positive changes. Can inspire. Take up. Many students take up extracurricular activities to enhance their skills. Okay, so here is a chart with the many different phrasal verbs, and by no means is this the extensive list of them. This is just a few of them to give you an idea. So we've seen some of these. We've got interesting ones like put up with. So that means to compromise, if you're putting up with something, it's not ideal, but nevertheless you are getting on with something or doing something regardless. Cool off, that means to stop something. To call something, I called off the party. That means to cancel. Run out of. Suddenly you don't have any more of the item that you once had. So I run out of bread. Put off, that means to delay. So you've got lots and lots of different examples here. You've probably seen a lot of them in writing and heard them in speech. So really good just to pick a few that you're comfortable with and ensure that you can use them in sentences, maybe create sentences with them. And we'll do some practice now so that you can have a look at how they can be used. Okay, so you might say something like, after a long and challenging relationship, we finally decided to... Any ideas? We finally decided to... Well, we can think about the chart, maybe put off, put up with, bring up. Have a think, and then we'll look at the answer together. So for this one, break up seems like the most suitable phrasal verb for this sentence. We finally decided to break up, which means to stop the relationship. Okay, next one. My summer vacations, it's the highlight of my year. Have a think, what's the most suitable phrasal verb? Perhaps you know of one that could work here. This seems like a very positive situation. So you can think of some positive phrasal verbs. That's a good way to categorize them actually into more positive ones or more negative type ones. Okay, let's double check this one. I always look forward to my summer vacations. So if you look forward to something, you're really, really excited for it. That's a nice one to use. Okay. I was expecting a few friends at the party, but unfortunately, none of them... So maybe you can think of some examples that aren't phrasal verbs that can go here, and that's okay. That's totally, that would totally work. None of them came. That would be fine. But if you are able to put in a phrasal verb, that really elevates the sentence here. So let's see what we could do with this one. Turned up. None of them arrived. None of them turned up. None of them came. Turned up is a great one to use for this situation. Another one, while exploring the library, I unexpectedly... An intriguing book on ancient civilizations. Okay, so as we've just been talking about, we can probably find words that aren't phrasal verbs that could work here. I unexpectedly saw, I unexpectedly found, but let's switch our focus to a phrasal verb to really step this up. Let's see what we can do. Came across. That's a great one. We've looked at that one before. This is a brilliant phrasal verb to put in there. And we've got another one. During the discussion about cultural differences, I wanted to... The topic of language barriers. I wanted to speak about what could be a phrasal verb for speaking about. Let's see if we remember. We could use bring up. I wanted to bring up the topic of language barriers. Okay, there we have it. So those were our phrasal verbs. We've gone through lots of examples there, and we've done a nice practice just to show you that words that you would normally use can sometimes be replaced by a phrasal verb, and this really, really can help you in your IELTS exam. This is great for showing the examiner your breadth of knowledge, your varied vocabulary, and a really good step towards those higher band marks. Okay, collocations now. So we are focusing on another part of English grammar here. So what exactly are collocations? Okay. Now, not to confuse them with phrasal verbs, although they are quite similar, I would say. Collocations are the arrangement of specific words that arrive together, that come together in a frequency greater than chance. And this is called the habitual juxtaposition. So habitually or often they are positioned next to each other. So in other words, put simply, collocations are just combinations of words that are commonly used together. And you might be surprised actually to see how many of them that you might recognise, and you might just use them naturally because they just occur together very frequently. Right, so there is a difference, and it's quite a subtle one. What's the difference between collocations and phrasal verbs? Well, phrasal verbs, says it in the name, are verb phrases that compose of a verb and one or two other words that are not verbs, but they combine with this verb to provide a full meaning to this verb, a full verbal meaning. A collocation, on the other hand, is a sequence of words that occurs more frequently than it should. If we are thinking about the statistics here and the probability, so a bit of maths, they are not random pairings. They, according to statistics, are combined together more often than not. So there is a theme there. They do occur together. All right. So phrasal verbs, and by definition, phrasal verbs are in fact collocations because they are two or more words that go together, but not all collocations are phrasal verbs. So this is something not to get too hung up about. I wouldn't worry too much, but just to be aware that, okay, the phrasal verbs and collocations are both phrases that go together, but they are slightly different. Phrasal verbs are focusing around the verb, whereas collocations, not all of them can be counted as phrasal verbs. But all phrasal verbs can technically be counted as collocations. Just a few tips now, just to make that really clear. So phrasal verbs are often more figurative, metaphorical, they're not literal. If the meaning can be understood by looking at the individual words, then what could it be? Well, it could actually be a collocation rather than a phrasal verb, because as discussed, phrasal verbs cannot be detected that easily, the meaning, by looking at their individual components. It's a new meaning. With phrasal verbs, the verb and particle are tightly connected and work together. However, in collocations, words can be from different groups. They're not limited to a verb and a particle. That's why not all collocations can be counted as phrasal verbs. So I hope that's clear. I hope that's sort of put your mind at rest if there was any burning questions as to how collocations and phrasal verbs are different. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about the difference, just as long as you're aware of the subtle differences here and confident in using both. That's the important thing. And talking about confidence, let's go to looking at some collocations now in more detail, and then we'll have a practice. So, a collocation you might recognise, highly recommend. When discussing books for the IELTS reading section, I highly recommend exploring a variety of genres to improve your comprehension skills. So this is a bit meta here because we're talking about the IELTS exam within the examples. So this could be like an examiner tip if you like. So yes, highly recommend. You can see it here. And this is a bit easier to decipher the meaning from the individual components. Highly recommend. So unlike phrasal verbs, we don't have an entirely new meaning. We just have two words that work nicely together and appear together quite often. So if you're thinking, if we go back to the friendship metaphor, I would say phrasal verbs are best friends, tight-knit. They almost have a new group to themselves. They're so close. Highly recommend are probably collocations in general are like two friends that like to spend time together, but they're not always together. Okay, another one, critical thinking. In academic writing, developing critical thinking is crucial as it enables you to analyse information and present well-supported arguments. So these are two words that you see together quite frequently. Vivid imagination. For the IELTS writing task, candidates with a vivid imagination often excel in creating compelling and imaginative essays. So creativity, imagination is great for the essay part of the IELTS exam. And vivid and imagination go together here. And a point to note actually is that we're not talking too much about the meanings because, like we've been saying, they're not creating a new meaning. So it's meaning that we can decipher from the two words themselves. Unlike the phrasal verbs where we were talking about, okay, what does it mean in this context? So that's a good way to differentiate them as well. Closely related. When comparing two ideas in the IELTS speaking test, it's essential to highlight how they are closely related to convey a clear and coherent response. Global perspective now. In discussions about social issues, having a global perspective is valuable as it allows you to consider diverse viewpoints and solutions. Okay, so another phrase that you see quite a lot. In-depth analysis. To score well in the IELTS academic writing task, candidates should provide an in-depth analysis of the given data or topic, showcasing a thorough understanding. So here it's quite nice. Our examples are very IELTS focused. So that's really useful, but of course they can also be used in casual conversation as well. So you've got a combination here of IELTS tips and examples all in one. Okay, let's have a think about some other collocations. We've got a nice chart here. Words that you see quite often: break the news, do the dishes, face a challenge. Phrases that you might not have even known were collocations, probably, a lot of them. And many of them are exactly the meaning that you might assume from the words. Not many of they're quite literal. Not many of them have a new take on the meaning. So face a challenge. You might be asked, can you tell me a time when you faced a challenge in your life? Meet a deadline. Can you discuss how you meet deadlines professionally? Is it important to keep a promise? Pay attention to this point. I would say that you probably use these phrases more often than you think, actually, because they are incredibly common. Okay, so we've come to the practice section now, and just like before, we're going to try and fill in the blank. So this might be a little bit easier than the phrasal verbs because they're a bit more logical here, then there's no new meanings. So just decide, okay, which one might be the most suitable for this context. In order to tackle complex problems, fostering is crucial. Anything that we've spoken about today that could fit in here? Any ones that you think could work? Maybe you've got a one word that could work. Now, could that be paired with another word that you find together to create this collocation? And for this one, we've actually got some help. So you can have global perspective, critical thinking, all closely related. So have a think. Which one best fits into that blank? And we'll have a look. Okay, what do we have? So it wasn't A, it was B. Critical thinking. In order to tackle complex problems, fostering critical thinking is crucial. Okay, wonderful. So let's go to another one. The professors that students explore a variety of resources for their research. Is it A, closely related? Is it B, vivid imagination? Or is it C, highly recommend? Have a think. What do you expect is the best fit for this sentence? Okay, let's see. If you were correct, it wasn't A. It wasn't B, so that means it's C. The professors highly recommend that students explore a variety of resources for their research. We've got another one. Creativity often involves A, allowing ideas to flow without constraints. Vivid imagination. Global perspective. Quiet room. Have a think. We've got some repeats here. So you might see the same collocations, which makes it a bit trickier. Okay, let's double check. So it was a vivid imagination for that one. So vivid imagination and creativity go hand in hand, really. Okay, so now let's just end today with an IELTS example here. So I've got a question. Can you tell me about a challenging decision you had to make in your life? So that could be a speaking example. And this is an example answer, and then we'll see if we can spot any phrasal verbs and collocations here. So you could say, certainly, one of the most challenging decisions I've ever had to make was when I decided to break away from my comfort zone and take a leadership role in a community project. It required me to step up to the plate and carry out the tasks at hand. So you might have recognized a few here. Have a think about what the examples might be in this one. Okay, and let's see the highlights. So we've got break away, take on, step up, carry out. Those are all phrasal verbs. And then leadership role is more of a collocation here. So you can see how they can really make your answers really relatable, feel very natural, and definitely in speech and in writing as well. They can really help elevate your conversations. There we go. So I hope that was really helpful today. And if you are able to include these in your IELTS speaking or IELTS writing, then I'm sure this can really help with that. Okay, so thank you so much for coming along, and we'll see you next time.